Welcome everyone to this new episode of the Privacy Rules PrivacyEspresso series, a series where we delve into the latest news on privacy, data protection from all over the world, and we do that with our local experts depending on where the news is coming from. Today I'm joined by Kristen Pennington, partner in the privacy and data protection group at McMillan, which is the Privacy Rules member law firm for Canada, and we've been working with them for a while now with great pleasure for us. And Kristen joins us today to discuss about some updates coming from Canada related not just to data protection regulation, but also on AI. Both are topics that have been heavily discussed, and yet we didn't see any step forward in terms of having a federal law in Canada. But this time it seems that we might have a kind of first step leading towards this target. So, Kristen, first of all, what was the announcement that your minister made that is making you thinking that this time might be a bit different?
Thanks so much, Alessandro. So, in comments to the media and at a conference over the last couple of weeks, Canada's dedicated AI minister has announced that Canada will table a refreshed AI strategy by the end of this year. And in particular, the minister has struck an AI task force with representatives from industry, academia, government, and he's asked them to go and consult with their networks, but also with the public, and to report back on bold and practical ideas to inform Canada's AI strategy. So the strategy was initially anticipated to take 2 years to develop, but now all of a sudden it's going to happen at a very accelerated pace, and the task force will be required to submit their report to the ministry by the end of next month. So a much faster timeline than we were initially anticipating. And the plan is supposed to touch on various aspects of AI development and regulation, including research, adoption, commercialization, investment, infrastructure, skills for the Canadian public and workforce, and also, of course, safety and security.
Okay, that sounds great. And if I may ask, which has been the motivation behind this? Because it looks like there was, already a path taken, but then the ministry decided to run a bit more into this. Was there a specific reason? Which is the reason behind?
Yeah, so the AI minister has really stressed the theme is the importance of Canada's digital sovereignty, he calls it. And his remarks recently allude to this being a particular priority given recent policy positions of other governments. I think we can infer that the United States government is part of that. So, for example, he has indicated that in his view, it's important for Canada to have its own digital economy, quote, that someone else can't decide to turn off. I think another part of it is also just a clear desire to be competitive, to attract and retain talent in AI research, development, and innovation.
Thanks a lot also for this, and sounds indeed extremely interesting and timely, meaning that it's a key moment to develop more into AI, also because in the rest of the world we are also witnessing further developments in this regard. And looking specifically at Canada, which is the impact that this may have on the privacy and data protection perspective? Because one of the key issues, at least I'm from Europe, it's always the combination between AI and privacy. Many things about IP, but if we look, the biggest sanctions that have been coming on AI-related matters, those were related to data protection-related matters. So what about Canada in this case?
Yeah, so the AI minister has actually acknowledged that an important part of Canada becoming a leader in AI is developing the Canadian public's trust in AI. So he's indicated that one of the federal government's key priorities is going to be privacy law reform, and in particular, modernizing Canada's existing federal privacy legislation. So the reform, he said, is going to focus on a number of things, including increased protections around deepfakes and other scams, as well as children's privacy, which has already been identified as a key priority of the federal privacy regulator. Another focus is going to be on setting clear standards or guardrails for how innovators can use personal information to develop and improve AI systems. And interestingly, this is another development that seems to be moving quickly. So, when he was asked by the press the expected timing of the proposed legislation, the AI minister indicated that the government's aiming to introduce a bill for privacy reform in the late fall of this year. So, we're already early October, so we wouldn't have long to go to meet that target.
Great, great, and thanks a lot also for giving us the data protection perspective around these. We were saying at the beginning that there have been prior attempts into having overall Canada federal privacy legislation. Why and why this time might be better or might work, and what is the difference about this new attempt compared to the other ones?
Yes, so folks that have been watching the Privacy Espresso series or listening to the podcast for years might feel like this is Groundhog Day and we've been here before. So, long story short, there have been two prior attempts by Canada's federal government to overhaul our existing federal privacy legislation. However, both bills ultimately died when our last two federal elections were called. So you'll recall, and I think we did a podcast on this a couple of years ago, the most recent attempt at reform was called Bill C-27. And it would have done a number of things if it was passed. It would have enacted brand new federal privacy legislation to replace what we already have in Canada. It would have introduced a host of new privacy compliance requirements for businesses, and it also would have sharply increased the potential enforcement mechanisms for businesses that don't comply. But Bill C-27 also would have introduced the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, or ADA as we referred to it here, which would have regulated interprovincial and international trade and commerce in certain AI systems. And ADA actually proved to be quite controversial, in part because it left a lot of its substantive content up to future released regulations. So the proposed legislation itself was quite vague, it didn't have a lot of meat on the bones. And ADA is widely thought to have been the issue that ultimately stalled the passing of Bill C-27 until it died earlier this year when our last federal election was called. So, if we flash forward to today with that history, the AI minister has said that parts of Bill C-27, particularly those that would have strengthened privacy protections and enforcement mechanisms, are likely to be included in this new bill that they're going to introduce this year. However, the controversial ADA probably will not be included in the bill. So, one point that remains open and that we'll have to see is whether the government's going to propose an alternative to ADA, so AI specific legislation, or if instead the government's focus is going to be on beefing up what they view as technology agnostic privacy legislation instead of trying to actually introduce an AI specific law. So that's one open point that we'll be keeping an eye on.
Perfect, and thanks a lot for that. Looking forward to be updated as soon as there are news on that. But it looks like that the simple reason why we might have more chances this time is there has been some sort of simplification and an idea of taking step by step. So let's start from somewhere in order to get to the next level instead of taking the risk of putting too many things into the water. So that's a definitely good idea, I believe, and hopefully it will work. As always, as a final question, Kristen, one of the key reasons why we have those discussions is also to go into the practical side of it. So, what should be business doing to prepare for those coming developments?
So obviously we'll have to see what the proposed legislation ultimately says. We have some hints, but of course we could always be surprised by the content of the bill itself, but also we'll have to see the final content once the bill makes its way through the legislative process, it gets debated, etc. So we'll have to see it in its final form if it hopefully passes ultimately before we really know what specific steps businesses are going to need to take to comply with the updated privacy law. But I think we can fairly assume that penalties for non-compliance with the law will likely increase. And in my view, it's unlikely that we'll see certain of our existing protections, like having a complete and accurate privacy policy, safeguarding personal information, using appropriate policies and procedures, having good technical safeguards in place, having appropriate contracts with vendors that handle personal information on behalf of your business, and ensuring that there are minimum and maximum retention periods that are enforced. I don't think we're going to see these things be rolled back. If anything, they'll be added to. So, businesses that are looking to get ahead of the curve, I would say, should start strengthening their existing privacy compliance programs, and then they'll be best placed to adapt to the new requirements if and when we know what they are. And last but not least, I'm always a big proponent of data mapping. So, creating an inventory of what personal information the business holds and taking stock of the purposes for which that personal information is used and held will put a business in a really great position to determine what additional compliance measures will be needed if and when we do have these new developments come into force.
Awesome, Kristen. Thanks a lot. That was extremely useful and very much in line also with what we are witnessing in other countries in a similar situation or in a bit more advanced situation, meaning the new AI laws are not coming from nowhere. Whatever is going to deal with is going to also learn from other existing frameworks. So, of course, if you want to comply with it in the context of data protection, you need to first look at data protection laws and make sure that you have everything ready there, because it's the first step in order to be, at a good level of compliance also with the upcoming laws that probably, won't add very much news into under this perspective, but it's just about changes a bit and making some tweaks to make sure that it works also in the new sector. And of course, that's why there are experts like you that make sure that companies and businesses goes into the right direction at the very beginning, so that you don't have to spend too much money or time into doing things that are then just replication on things that you have done or you could have been avoiding in the past. So, Kristen, thanks a lot for sharing all of this together with us. It sounds promising, so we keep fingers crossed to soon have a confirmed news from Canada. It was a pleasure, and very much looking forward to any update coming from Canada and the McMillan team. Thank you also to our audience for being with us. Looking forward to our next PrivacyEspresso episode. Bye, everyone, and bye, Kristen, again.